around. All right, there we go. Everybody can see it. All right, so when we are talking about trauma just in general, there is one way that you can think about, again, the uniqueness as to where we are now is that we are in a collective experience. So you can really have this conversation in a different way, whereas in the past, when I've done this training, I've relied on you kind of tapping into past experiences or looking at, the clients that you serve and thinking of experiences that they have had. But the uniqueness around this and doing this training now is that we can tap into the collective experience that we're all having. So when you think about what we're going through currently, when it comes to trauma, there is an equation that you can always use to kind of determine if the particular experience that's going on is a traumatic experience. So, trauma is simply, and something that's labeled trauma is simply about three things. It's about a particular event that takes place. So, there's an actual harmful event, or at times there can be the extreme threat of some sort of physical or psychological harm. So, it doesn't have to, for an event to be considered traumatic, it doesn't have to actually have happened. There are times when people face traumas and the thing didn't actually happen, but it was just the threat of that thing happening that was so extreme and so severe for people that they developed trauma from it. So when you take a particular event, such as COVID-19 and what we're going through, you add our collective experiences or your individual experiences, actually, to that. And the piece and the reason why I ask for some people to share about how they are experiencing it is because we will all individually experience this differently. So when we come to the other side of this, when we get there, when our clients get there, when the students get there, to the other side of this, we will all have a different experience about how this is going. And what actually happened to us. And we can even see that now where there are some people with just the year 2020, some people are like, oh, this is like the worst year of my life and it's a horrible experience. And then there are other people who will look at this as somewhat of an opportunity. Although it is kind of a bittersweet type of an opportunity, but there are people who have looked at this moment, this global pause that we had at one point where everyone was sitting still. There are some people that saw that as an opportunity for them to do what Ali said. Well, now I can actually focus a little bit on my self-care because I'm not running around everywhere. Now I'm, taking this time to start a workout program, to, do something that I've been saying I wanted to do. So our collective experience, and I know there are times when people will say, oh, well, that's horrible. How can you say that, you found opportunity in this when so many people lost their lives and so many people lost jobs and all that? But I think the one thing that we have to remember to do is to leave out the judgment, that there is no wrong way, that there's absolutely nothing wrong with seeing this time period that we've gone through and the collective trauma that we've experienced as an opportunity for you to shift some things in your life and to change some things and for those things to be better. So it doesn't have to necessarily be just kind of a doom and gloom type of a situation. Although there will be people who will go through this and it will definitely change their lives in tremendous ways to where it may be more difficult for them to be able to recover from this. So you're going to have the spectrum. And that's what, I want you to remember about trauma is that there is a spectrum to it. It's not just, this one finite thing. So when you combine an individual person's experience with that particular event, and then you add on the effect that it had. And that's the key piece that determines whether or not an event like this will be highly traumatic for some people or it will be a lot less traumatic. It's all about the effect that this particular event has on that individual. So the ultimate effect of the event on the individual can range anywhere from just mild fear and anxiety that we experience maybe at the very beginning when we first got started with this. I think most of us experienced some worry, some fear, some anxiety at the beginning because we just didn't know what it was, what was going on, what was going to happen. And so that was kind of a collective experience. As we have worked our way through, there may be some people who are still at that very heightened level of fear and anxiety and worry, which can then sort of progress itself to more severe anxiety, panic attacks, depression. Once we're done with all this, it could potentially lead to PTSD and more serious mental illnesses. So just know again that when you're thinking about trauma, you have to think about all three of those pieces. You have to think about the event itself, you have to think about the experience, and then you have to think about the effect that it has on each individual person. And we've gone through collectively as a country a number of, traumatic events that were large. September 11th was a collective traumatic event for a number of people. Hurricane Katrina was another collective dramatic event. So we've had, some traumas that have taken place, but just nothing at the level of what we are currently experiencing now. Let's see. There we go. So the spectrum of trauma goes from everything from the beginning kind of being ACEs, and you've heard probably a lot by now about adverse childhood experiences. So when you think of experiences that have happened to you that have adversely affected you during your childhood, that is what an ACEs is. And so there are scores and little tests that you can get for ACEs to give to youth to kind of see, but there are simple ways where you can just sort of determine with a young person that you're working it with if they've had those adverse childhood experiences by just knowing what is considered an ACEs and then having conversations with them around the things that they have experienced. So it doesn't necessarily take a pen and paper kind of a test for you to be able to determine if that child has a large number of ACEs. And so I'm going to skip back and forth a little bit. So here's a list of what would be considered adverse childhood experiences. So everything from homelessness to community violence to incarcerated parents, parents that are dealing with substance abuse issues, domestic violence, young people who have experienced the death of a parent or a caregiver, sexual abuse, neglect, physical and emotional abuse. Natural disasters are considered ACEs. So again, things like I mentioned earlier, September 11th, Hurricane Katrina, any of the hurricanes that we've experienced. School violence. If you have been in a school where it is, an unusually violent type of an environment, then that's considered an adverse childhood experience. Or if you have been directly involved in some type of school violence, then that's an adverse childhood experience. Witnessing the death, murder, or suicide of a friend, a family member, that's an ACEs. Bullying has now been included on the adverse childhood experiences list. So anytime you have experienced that type of a situation, whether in school or out of school, then that is considered to be an ACEs. Extreme medical conditions, that's includes youth with things like diabetes and things like that, where it's an ongoing, very serious type of medical condition, cancers and things like that. Being a military family and the mobility and the constant moving, war and terrorism, so being involved in, again, like something like September 11th. System-induced trauma, if young people are a part of a lot of times the social service system, the juvenile or the juvenile justice system, then that they can have system-induced trauma from those types of experiences. Forced displacement, mental illness of a family member, if they are experiencing living with and dealing with a person that has a severe mental illness like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, those kinds of things. Parents being separated and divorced is an adverse childhood experience. And then now we have added COVID-19, a global pandemic, as being an adverse childhood experience. So we can look at this, we have to look at trauma in both ways, from the child perspective, if you're working with youth, if you have children of your own, If you have nieces, nephews, then they are this, thing that we're experiencing. And sometimes because, we have to sort of think about ourselves as adults first, because we are the ones who kind of control what's going on and safety and all of that. So we're experiencing this one way, but you really have to be mindful, and really tap into how the children around you are experiencing this. And I'll give you an example of a client that I was working with. I think she said her son was like 6. And she was like, he is really frustrating me. We're both in the house together. And just, just the being in the house together continuously was, I think, kind of frustrating for her. But then she's like, he has these habits that are just really frustrating me and getting on my nerves. And I'm not sure, why he's doing what he's doing. And so I kind of asked her to describe, well, what is it that he's doing? And she said, well, he keeps playing this game, and he keeps playing this game all over, all the time in the living room, where he's like falling out and he's acting like he's dead. And she was like, it's driving me crazy. Like, I don't understand why he's never done that before. And so while we were doing the Zoom video call, he came up as most kids do and kind of, tried to get on camera. And I, said hello to him. And so I asked him a couple of questions about that. And, I said, well, what are you thinking right now? What kinds of things are you thinking about? And are you worried about, what's going on with the virus and things like that? And he was able to say, yes, that he was, worried, he was concerned about it. And it was some conversation back and forth, because he had been told by someone, or he either heard from someone, that, so many people were dying from it. And then going outside, he has to put this mask on and all of that. And so in his mind, that was his way of sort of acting out his fear around dying from this virus. And so for his mother, because he was doing it at times when, it wasn't appropriate for her, she had other things to do. She's trying to work and do things like that. But, he was just trying to express to her, the worry and concern that he has. So you have to be, mindful of sort of changes in behavior for our children, that they may not have necessarily the words to express to you what they're experiencing. Or to be able to articulate to you how they're experiencing this, but sitting down and having conversations with them. I know my own grandson, he came over with his mom, and Blake is 4. And, usually he comes in and he gives us hugs. And that particular day, my wife was like, oh, Blake, come give me a hug. And he was like, no. And so she was like, oh, why don't you, and she was like, boy, come over here and give me a hug. And he was like, no. And he was like standing back, kind of like, no, Gigi, I'm not hugging you. And so I kind of watched, what he was doing. And then he said very quickly, but it was low. If you weren't paying attention, you would have missed it. And he was like, no, I might get sick. And so we were like, oh, and so I sat him down, and talked to him, and I was like, you won't necessarily get sick, because you could kind of see the concern and the fear in his face as a 4-year-old, that all he knows is that I've heard people say that if you touch people or if you hug people, I'm going to get sick. So we have to think about the long-term impact that can have on 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds that are growing up now, because it may instill in them long-term fear that they won't want to touch people after this is over. So I think we have to be really careful about how we explain things to young people, in saying, yes, that we want to be cautious and we want to be careful, but you won't get sick every time you touch somebody. And so that's kind of what you have to make sure, that there is a balance in how you're explaining this to them, in how you're helping them to process it. And don't just assume that because there isn't some acting out behavior that everything is okay. That we should never make that assumption. We have to initiate those conversations. We have to ask them, how much do you really understand about what's going on? And, or do you have any questions about what's going on? That, at its simplest, will kind of open them up and help them be able to ask you whatever questions they might be thinking, but they won't necessarily come to you and ask. So, ACEs is again a live, active thing that's going on right now. So we have to be really aware of how our children are experiencing this. Acute trauma is a single time limited traumatic event. So what we are going through now as adults would be considered acute trauma. So it is this particular single event. We hope it's time limited in the sense that this thing will be over sometime soon. Um, Chronic trauma is when you experience multiple traumatic exposures or events over an extended period of time. You continue to be traumatized. There are some people who, with this event, would be in the category of being like chronically traumatized because if they were experiencing traumas, so we're working with people who were already experiencing homelessness. And so now, on top of their homelessness, and you can think of chronic trauma as like layers of trauma. So you already had the homeless piece that was there as an adult, being unemployed could have been there, or you lost the job, and now there's the COVID-19 on top of it. So chronic trauma becomes a layered kind of experience where it's just sort of one traumatic thing after the other. The other piece for us to be very aware of is secondary trauma, exposure to the trauma of others as an experience by a caregiver, family member. So when you are experiencing trauma, it's not you per se, but you are experiencing the trauma of others. In the work that we do, secondary trauma is very real for us because the more you hear someone else tell their traumatic story, the more you listen to them and try to help them through whatever it is that they're going through, then you have to be really sort of in tune with yourself because it can very quickly affect us both mentally and emotionally, and sort of how we show up. So you may notice some of the things that I've noticed, just with myself is that you find yourself thinking about that person and their situation and that trauma, not necessarily just hours after you've had that conversation, but maybe days after you've had that conversation. Like it's a conversation you can't really get out of your head. Then that is moving towards you experiencing secondary trauma. If you become really sort of ingrained and obsessed with solving or fixing that person's situation, you kind of taking it personally, where it's become like just your thing and your mantra that you really feel like I've got to do something about this, then again, you have to take a step back and ask yourself, are you experiencing secondary trauma? Because in many ways, you probably are. And then just this morning, someone mentioned their own personal, I think it was Madison who mentioned her own personal feeling burnout and that compassion fatigue. So, compassion fatigue is another one that's very real for us now because we're all in the profession that we're in because we are helpers, because we are people who love serving other humans. But in this capacity, we're very confined with how we're doing that service. We're very limited with what we can do for others. And so you can become very sort of emotionally traumatized and drained from trying to figure out too much about how to help other people through this particular situation that we're all being exposed to. So these are just the main sort of aspects of the trauma spectrum that I wanted us to be aware of at this point in time, and to really, again, just keep it in the back of your mind that these are things that are, possibilities. And so you really have to kind of think about, most immediately yourself first, then those around you, those that are within your household, and then as you branch it out to your clients at work and other family members. So really keeping these things in mind. So one of the things that I wanted, so trauma itself affects how we feel, what we think, and how we behave. So all three of these things get impacted when we are in a traumatic situation. So it affects our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about the people around us, and our beliefs about the world. So all three of those things get impacted. So I want you to take a couple of seconds and just think about what you've experienced so far with COVID-19. Um, has there, and if anybody wants to share, then I would love for you to unmute yourself and share. But when you think about your beliefs about yourself, and again, they could be positive or negative, doesn't necessarily have to be negative. But has this experience that we've collectively had change your beliefs about yourself or any beliefs that you had about yourself?
I am Hi, so I'm Evelyn. I work at the landing as well. And early on we had a group with the kids, and we're talking to them about COVID because we were very aware that this is something difficult for adolescents as well, and kind of giving them the
Mm-hmm.
space to talk about it. But even allowing the students that space to talk about their experience, hearing one of the students say that they found adults were not being empathetic to their experience of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
And that they found themselves, like, when they try to complain about how difficult it's been for them, to their families, to their parents,
Mm-hmm.
their parents are like, well, you're a kid, you're fine. Like us adults, we're going through it
Right,
for
right.
COVID. But you're a kid, you're fine. And I found myself even though, like, as a group, the landing, we had been, I had been telling them, like, we need to support our youth. We need to be able to reach out to them. It's a difficult time for them. Hearing them say it, I was like, I think I've done that with, like, my nieces
Mm-hmm.
and nephew who are way younger, because they're so much younger. I've been like, oh, they don't really understand. They don't know what's going on. Like, but this has been their world has now been turned upside
Right.
down. Like, my daughter's 2, and all of a sudden I'm home all the time, but I'm in an office with the door closed,
Right.
and she can't come in, and I'm like, I'm at work, and she's like, wait, but you're home. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't, see. So taking into effect, it has opened up my eyes in thinking of how I could be more compassionate, because I thought I was compassionate, I was being empathetic, and then I keep finding myself feeling like, oh, I need to be better about that.
Right. And it's a constant balancing of, we've got to first and foremost, care for ourselves, because if we don't, then just like someone said in the beginning, you won't have the capacity to be able to really reach out and care for the other people around you. But what you said is so true. Like, you can't make the assumption that all of our children are just okay with this, that they're all, even kids who, used to hate school and were like, oh my God, every day you was like dragging them out the bed and trying to get them to go to school. And those kids, even now, even though at that moment they were like, oh my God, I don't want to get up in the morning and go to school, but they are missing that experience. Now that they can't do it, now that they don't have it, then for many of them, there's like, okay, well, there were things I didn't like about school, but I didn't want the whole thing to go away. Well, I like that social aspect of being able to be with my friends, or I like some of the teachers, or, there were things that I liked about this that now that it's all gone temporarily, then I'm having a hard time dealing with that. For some kids, just being at home all the time, even those kids, and again, it's like a lot of times with many things, the quiet ones don't make the assumption that for kids who are really quiet, and it's like, oh, oh, my son's fine, he stays in his room all the time, and he plays on his games, and he's fine, and he's doing okay. Like, don't assume that he's doing okay. Ask. And that's the biggest thing. Like, have that conversation, be intentional about it. And it's as simple as, how are you doing today? Well, how do you feel today? What are you thinking? How, just simple little statements like that, simple little questions like that, allows them, it gives them that safe space. So it's just like what Evelyn was saying, whereas don't just dismiss them and say, oh, well, I've got to think about keeping my job, keeping the rent paid, keeping, all of those things. I got big things to think about. And so you're a kid, you're at home, you're safe, you don't even have to go to school, those kind of things. So you're all right. Don't make those assumptions, because a lot of times, our youth won't be okay. And the same thing even with us as adults, as with your, significant others and other family members that are there or not in the same house with you. Don't make those assumptions either that they're okay. So we have to sort of be diligent about asking each other how we're doing, and checking in with each other. So anybody else want to share, just how, if there is a belief about yourself, about people around you, or about the world in general, that has, changed since you've gone through this experience?
I can
I'll
share.
share.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. I will say that I think my views about the world have changed. I feel like, before all of this, there was such an emphasis on like roles that we have in life and positions that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the coronavirus has really shown me that at the very basic level, we're just human beings. And no matter what we've done or what we've accomplished in this moment in time, it really isn't important in the grand scheme of things. It's like I heard Ali say, going to have a routine, procedure done. You don't know who you're sitting in the parking lot with. I know, like at my doctor's office, if you had a cough, they were like, no, you sit out here and we'll bring, whatever you need to
Right.
you. And so I think at that level, it didn't matter that the person in the car next to me was a police officer or a lawyer or, it just was a human being. We're just having human experiences. So it has definitely been a humbling experience for me to put more effort into what really matters in life and not so much into the superficial things that, as we can see now, are not really that important.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. It's, I share that same experience where it's like some things, it made you pause long enough to say, well, these things that I was so wound up in, are they really that important at this point? Like, no. And some of the things that we thought we couldn't live without, we were like, oh my, oh, if you had asked, how they do those Facebook polls all the time, it's like, oh, if you could live without this, or, you had to take out one thing out of these three. And it's like now, I was like, wow, I don't really need as much as I thought I did to be able to live and to be happy and to be well. And so I think it has made us question just sort of who we are. It's made us question the things that we've been doing in life and how important those things are. And it's made us question, I think, in the beginning, sort of each other. So when we were going through the things with the toilet paper and the hand sanitizer and all that kind of stuff, and there not being any in the stores and people, really getting aggressive with each other over those basic items. I think at that time it made us sort of question or change and shift some of our beliefs about the world as well. And so with those kinds of experiences, some of the things we have to realize that um, we're all showing up differently than probably we would have before. So when we stepped into this traumatic event, then most of us probably stepped into it with some version of a calm thinking brain. We were able to think rationally from our frontal lobe. We could make decisions. We didn't really have a lot of, impulsive behavior, and that we were thinkers and planners. When this hit for many people, what happens when you experience trauma is that your brain, quickly shifts into a survival brain. It's all about, I need to get what I need to get in order to survive. And so in the beginning, that first month, most of us were on survival brain. We were in overload. We were just like, listen, they said there's no more toilet paper. What? I can't live without toilet paper. I got to do what I got to do. And so people were fighting in stores and doing just all kinds of crazy stuff because that survival brain had taken over. Their amygdala was activated like none before. And the amygdala is all about fear and emotion. And so everything was heightened. If you think back to, your experience with that, things that probably, normally wouldn't make you fearful, you were very quick to be fearful about. Things that you didn't worry about before, you were quick to be more worried about. You were quick to get, more angry about or frustrated about the fact that you couldn't go to the store and get the basic stuff that you needed. So for some of us, we have gone back to that calm thinking kind of a brain. Some people have not. Some people are still kind of in that fight or flight type of a stage. And so we have to realize that with our families and with people, clients that we're dealing with the young people, they may still be in that fight or flight stage. You may still be in that fight or flight stage. And so you have to be self-aware first. And then you have to be observant of those around you to see, is that where they are? Are they reacting from that type of a brain as opposed to a calmer one? So what you may feel within yourself or see in others is, again, more anxiety, fear, and worry, changes in your behavior, anger outbursts. Again, with all of us being in the house together and now virtually homeschooling again, You may find that, again, your 6-year-old does something, your 7-year-old would do something before, and you would just be like, oh, sit down, stop that. And now you look and you're like, what? Because you're trying to work, you're on, Zoom, and they're doing whatever they normally do in the background, but you don't need that to interact with what you have going on. And so you find yourself angering quicker, or having sort of angry outbursts, or being, irritable. Maybe your performance, there's been changes in your job performance or things like that, changes in your sleeping pattern, difficulty with criticism. For some people, that becomes a thing where it's like, if you get an email from a supervisor or someone, you take it a lot more personally, and it's a lot more impactful now, as opposed to what it was before. Emotional numbing. Some people, again, are still trying to avoid dealing with all of this. And so they seek to numb themselves emotionally, where they just shut it off, or they use some substances to shut it off, but they just don't want to sort of tap in and feel the emotions that are coming around this. Or you might find yourself with repetitive thoughts around, your own mortality. Am I sick? Just like she said, there are emotional triggers right now for us, or simple things like sneezing and coughing and things like that. You cough 3 or 4 times and you start thinking, well, hold on, wait a second, it's something. You're like, okay, something got in my nose. It's like, it's some pepper. It's that kind of thing. It's not corona. But because of where we are, the simple things like that are now emotional triggers. So just like she said, you could be at the doctor's office and somebody sneezed twice and everybody turns and looks at them like, like they have the plague or something. It's like they just sneeze. That's it. So we have to realize that there are triggering things that, again, used to be normal stuff for us, but will be triggers for us now because of what we've experienced. So whether an event is traumatic for one person and not for another depends on each person's ability to cope with that event and the resources they have to respond to it. So in the beginning, there may have been a lot of people who, if you didn't have money saved in the bank, if you didn't have, a really secure job, if you didn't have those kinds of things in the beginning, then you went to survival brain real fast, because you recognized that you maybe didn't have the resources to deal with what was going on. You also, if you hadn't been taking care of yourself, if you didn't have specific self-care practices and those kinds of things, then you may have gone to survival brain really quickly, because you felt like, oh, I spent years not taking care of myself, or there were things I could have done, or things like that. So you start to go back and forth, and kind of beat yourself up about things. So the question that you have to ask now is, do you, your clients, and your community have the resources to respond to this traumatic event? And do you, your clients, and your community have the ability and the strategies to cope with this event? Nobody went into this perfect. Nobody expected it. Nobody was prepared. So it is what it is. But right now, those are the two things that we have to think about. If you're in a position where you help people get resources, then being just helpful and non-judgmental about helping people get the resources that they need, because they'll come out of this better if they have some resources to work with. If there's a job there, if there's the basic necessities that they need to have. The other piece that we all need to think about, and I think when we think about COVID-19, there are two things that we've done a lot in our country to deal with this. One, the first thing was all of the health protocols that we put in. So that's the main thing that everybody thinks about with this, is the health side of it. It's like, oh, we have to flatten the curve. We have to, wear a mask, social distance, do all those things. And that's absolutely true. The second thing that we did as a country was we focused on the financial side of it. Okay, people are losing jobs, things like that. So we've got to stimulate the economy. We've got to give people money. We've got to do things like that. The piece I still haven't seen yet is the last and most important piece, and that is the mental health side of this thing. The longer that we're out of our quote, normal way of being, not going to school, not going to work, staying at home, being social distance, those kinds of things, it has a mental toll on people constantly. And it's a long-term mental toll that's taking place. And so that's where those coping strategies come in. So you may have taken care of, no, I didn't get the virus. Yes, I got a stimulus check and things like that. I kept my job, got unemployment. So financially, I was okay. But you come through the other side and you're like, I don't really know what's going on with me, but I still can't shake this. And it's because that mental side wasn't addressed. Those coping strategies weren't addressed. So, as providers, again, I want to caution you not to try to do the Superman, Superwoman thing. It's not the time for it. We can't save everybody. We really can't save anybody. We have to be honest about who we are and what we do. We can offer some assistance, which is what we want to do. But when you think about making our way through this trauma as well as recovering and having a better recovery on the other side of it, there are 5 essential elements that I want you to think about for yourself personally, and then I want you to use this as a tool in the work that you do in your, in your household. It covers all areas. That if we focus on these 5 things as we're going through this experience, you will come out of the other side of it better. Won't erase the experience, but it will make for a better recovery when you get to the other side. So first is safety. That's just basic for all of us, that, there has to be a focus on the element of safety, washing your hands, wearing your mask, doing all the CDC guidelines. If you don't feel well, seeking medical attention, that kind of thing. So the second one is a sense of calm. So doing things that creates a sense of calm in your life on a daily basis. So one, telling yourself that your feelings of being anxious, scared, angry, worried, they're all normal emotions. And the thing that we, from a mental health perspective, that we absolutely cannot do during this time is to squelch our emotions, is to tuck them away, to do that I'm okay kind of thing that a lot of us often do. I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. And that you don't want to process any of the emotions that you have around this. That's the worst thing that you could do. That's the worst thing that your clients can do, is to just do that. I'm going to dig in. I'm going to be okay. And I don't feel anything about this, because again, that will all hit you on the other side of this. So it's perfectly normal for some days for you to feel like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. It's perfectly okay. There are days for you to be angry about this and ask why, is all of this taking place? I had things I wanted to do. All of that is perfectly fine. It's okay for you to have days where you just sit and go, I don't even know what to do. I have no clue. I'm just lost. And that's perfectly okay too. So with the calm piece, practicing self-calming techniques, learning them yourself, teaching them to your children and families, and then teaching them to your clients. And we're going to get to a couple of them as we go through, but I want to run through this list. Connection, keeping connected to the people who are important to you on a regular basis, scheduling regular video check-ins of some sort. So even if it's just a quick FaceTime, hey, how you doing? I just need to see your face and know that you're okay type of thing. But having some kind of consistent connection with people. Self-help, this is the biggest one. One of the things that we often do as service providers is we do a lot of providing services for other people, helping other people. At this point, trying to fix things for them is not the answer, but instilling self-help in them is the answer. So helping your clients, helping yourself, helping your children, all do things that are empowering them to help themselves. So one of the things that I encourage everybody to do is to make a list of the things you can control and the list of the things you can't control, if you need to, on a daily basis. It's just a simple T chart. It's to divide the paper in half. On one side, the things I can control, listing those, and on the other side, the things I can't control, listing them. And it's different from when you think about it as opposed to when you put it on paper. There is a releasing that happens with it when you put these things on paper. And you can just put it on paper, ball it up, and throw it away once you're done with it. But it's emotionally releasing because it allows you to get it out of your head. So being okay with what's on that list of things you cannot control. And it helps your mind to kind of stay away from thinking about and ruminating over those things you can't control. Doing a mental health checkup with yourself weekly. So checking in with yourself mentally, and you can use this exact chart to kind of do that mental health checkup. So you can ask yourself, do I feel safe today? How safe do I feel? What aspects of my life are feel safe to me, and just write them down in that box. Do I feel calm today at this moment? Do I feel calm? Am I doing things on a daily basis to help me feel calm? Do I feel connected? Do I feel connected with other people outside of the immediate people that are with me? And especially if you're at home by yourself, do you feel connected? Do you truly feel connected to other people? What are you doing to stay connected? Self-help. Am I helping myself in some kind of way? So asking yourself and having them fill out that box. And then hope. Do I have a sense of hope? Do I feel hopeless today? If I feel hopeless today, what's causing me to feel hopeless? If To get myself to feel more hopeful, what are the things that I need to do? So we all need to continue with that sense of hope. But to finish up self help, choosing and practicing some self care strategy that makes you feel good. Something, doesn't matter what it is. There's no judgment. If it's just vegging out in front of the TV for 2 hours every day, that's fine. Whatever it is that you do for yourself that makes you feel better at the end of doing that. So for hope, making sure again that you are staying away from negative things that on social media, the news, that kind of thing. We don't need to constantly stay and ruminate in that, but move towards things that are reporting the good things that are happening in the world. And then the last one, a very powerful practice for keeping a sense of hope, is practicing visualizing your life the way you want it to be after this is over. So really spending some time sitting and closing your eyes and visualizing what you want to be doing. So for example, Opal saying that she would normally be in Jamaica at this time. One of the things that she can do to relieve her level of sadness with it is to sit and visualize herself. What would she be doing in Jamaica at this point? Would she be on the beach? See yourself on the beach. Would you be visiting family members, having cookouts and barbecues? But sit and spend some time seeing yourself doing that thing. This time last year, I was in Puerto Rico for the entire summer. I haven't gotten a chance to go anywhere. My birthday came and went, and I normally travel. So what I've been doing for the last few days is just sitting and remembering what I was doing in Puerto Rico, the place we were, the beach, the view, all of those kinds of things, which helps me to have hope that at some point we will be back and doing those things. So there are some strategies I listed, and we don't have enough time to go over all of them. But you are going to receive an email with the handout. There's one that I definitely want us to do real quick. Breathing is a key thing. If you can practice breathing exercises like the one we did this at the start with yourself, with your children, with your clients, it helps in the moment to alleviate a lot of the emotional stress that comes along with this. The other piece is I'm a big believer in reflexology. And one of the things that you can do at any given time, if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, if you're starting to feel worried, in reflexology, each one of our fingers is connected to a particular emotion that we feel. So your thumb tends to be connected to a sense of worry. Your index finger tends to be connected to a sense of fear. Your middle finger tends to be connected to a sense of sadness. Oh, I'm sorry, anger. Sadness is your ring finger, and then your sense of self esteem or sort of a lack of confidence, if you will, is your pinky finger. One of the things that I often teach young people to do and adults in my practice is when you're feeling emotion around a certain thing. So, for example, earlier with all of this, I really got, because I can be a thinker, I can get in my head a lot. I was really worried about just like what's going to happen with this, what's going to happen with my business, what's going to happen with all these things. And I found myself just being caught in a lot of worry. And so, it took me a minute, took me a few weeks to remember your practices, remember the things that you know to do. And so one of the things that I do now often is you can just massage, again, your thumb, just this piece, and you will be amazed at how much that alleviates the mental anguish when you're really worried. And so all it is just taking your thumb and just doing this with it with your other hand. So if you're feeling overly worried about something, again, that's all you have. And just do it for a few minutes until you find yourself being a little bit more calm, a little bit more relaxed about things. Again, if it's fear, same thing with your index finger. Do the same type of thing with your index finger. And this is a thing that you can teach to, again, any client that you have, anybody that you're working with. It really does work. And like I said, if it's one particular thing, if it's sadness, if it's one particular thing that you feel like you're always going towards that emotion, then you will find yourself, it'll just become a habit. And you'll find yourself doing it. And there are times when I do it with and I'm like, oh, am I worried about something? And I'm like, you know what, I am. I'm thinking a lot about, what's going to happen and how can I pivot my business and how can I do that kind of thing. And so you just breathe a little bit with it. And it will relax you and sort of alleviate the mental anguish that you have with that one. Thinking about yourself as professionals. So just remembering to manage, the things for yourself, that balance between work and life. We're working at home. There's blurred lines with that. So really, trying to give yourself breaks. Making sure that there is a set time when you stop working and you go back into your home life, seeking support, taking time out. So doing, and just remembering and understanding what we talked about earlier about secondary trauma, and compassion fatigue. So remembering those kinds of things. So we have resources for you. WellSpace is there. You can always go and get more information about these kinds of things on the website as well. So that's it. There's my contact information, and I know we probably are about 4 minutes over, but I want to just say, if you have any questions, then I'm willing to stay and answer any of those questions if you have any. If you need additional strategies, you have my email. So, and I, definitely respond. So as you are going through this yourself, as you are working with your clients, if you want additional resources and strategies, advice, whatever that is, then you can always feel free to reach out to me. I will definitely respond back to you and try to help as much as I possibly can. So knowing that we all need to support each other as we continue to go through this moment that we're having. So any questions? I'm going to stop the screen share. Hold on. It'll let me. There we go.
Hey, Tanya, I wanted to ask, can we share the slides if we are working in a group with students?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so in the handouts that Lateria sent you, so you have everything that's on the slideshow, you get that. And then I also gave you a second handout that has those 5 essentials. It gives you one with the examples in it, and then I gave you one blank, so you can actually use that actual exercise as sort of a mental health check-in with your clients, with your family members, whoever, where you're going through and asking yourself those 5 essential questions about how you feel for each one of those areas.
Thank you so much. This was great.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I was going through the slides and all the information that was emailed out, so thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And like I said, if there's anything else you think of, then I am here for you. I'm always a resource. So